Hey, everybody. Welcome to our April program. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Ron Mumme, who is Professor Emeritus of Biology from Allegheny College, who is also a Fellow of the American Ornithological Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And also, hot off the presses, just this week, he was named the 2024 recipient of the Margaret Morse Nice Medal. How about that? Yes, yes. Ron earned his bachelor's degree at the University of Florida back when I was a young child. And then he earned his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. No, when I was a teenager. I was a teenager by then, just barely, yes. Following his postdoctoral work at Cornell, he joined the Allegheny faculty in 1990, and he was there up until last year. He retired in 2023. Dr. Mumme's major research interests are animal behavior and avian behavioral ecology. And since 2010, his research has focused on the relationship between plumage pattern and foraging performance in the hooded warbler, a species that uses displays of its conspicuous white tail spots to startle potential insect prey and enhance foraging success. During his career, he has also done field research on acorn woodpeckers in California. He has worked on Florida scrub jays, and yes, you guessed it, Florida. And then slate-throated redstarts. I don't even know what a slate-throated redstart looks like. That's cool. But slate-throated redstarts in Costa Rica. But of course, tonight he is here to talk about hooded warblers and his work with hooded warblers at Hemlock Hill Field Station in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron Mumme. Ron?
Thank you very much, Brian. Whoops, there's somebody else. Oh yeah, admit, here we go. Okay. Thank you, Brian, and thank you all for coming. Before I start to talk about the work I've been doing with hooded warblers, you know, it's spring, it's an exciting time. I wanted to just get some feedback from the audience. What's your favorite breeding bird in Pennsylvania? I'll start. Hooded warbler is mine. What a surprise! But could I hear some other favorite breeding birds that you? Eastern bluebird. That's a great one. So a very endearing bird. How about say it? Eastern towhees. That's another fabulous bird. How about some other favorite Pennsylvania breeding birds? Indigo bunting, that's a nice one. What I'm not hearing is brown-headed cowbird. Why is that not on anybody's list of favorite birds, breeding birds of Pennsylvania? And that's, of course, because they're brood parasites. Brown-headed cowbirds lay their eggs in up to a nest of as many as 250 other species of birds and rely on the host species to care for the young. And nobody likes cowbirds for that reason. But nonetheless, they are part of our Pennsylvania avifauna. And what I'm going to tell you about is how their interactions are with hooded warblers. And in this case, cowbirds are actually not as bad as you might think. But I've been let's see, here we go. Hooded warblers, many of you know they're a species that breeds in eastern North America, mostly in the eastern U.S., also a population in southern Ontario. The center of their wintering distribution is in the Yucatan Peninsula. But they also breed along the coast of Mexico, Central America, and in the Caribbean. Males, of course, have this distinctive black hood. Females are variable. Some females, particularly young females, have essentially no black on their face. Other females can have hoods that are nearly as extensive in males, and in some situations can look very similar to males as well. And I've been studying them for a number of years at Hemlock Hill Field Station, which is conveniently located just 15 miles northeast of Meadville. And also, it's right across the street from the Xilax house, which is right there, if I'm not mistaken. And Hemlock Hill if you get into the ornithological literature at all, you find out that Hemlock Hill is actually a really well-known study location, largely because of the work of these two biologists who have actually joined us online too. Hi, Jean, and hi, Bridget. Gene Morton, formerly the Smithsonian Institution and the National Zoo. He's now retired. Bridget Stutchberry, professor of biology at York University and soon to be retired. They have set up Hemlock Hill Field Station, and their students, their postdocs, and other research associates have made extensive use of the property over the years. So it's been a real pleasure to sort of continue in this long tradition of bird research at this well-known field site in Crawford County. Hemlock Hill consists of about 180 hectares of beech maple hemlock forest. One nice thing about it, it's gridded with flagged points 50 meters apart, which makes it difficult, but as my students will tell you, not completely impossible to get lost while you're out there. But the real attraction for me, of course, that every year there's anywhere from 50 to 70 nesting pairs of hooded warblers there. If any of you have ever submitted an eBird list with hooded warblers on it, you have contributed to this great animation that's produced from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology based on eBird data, which shows the yearly distribution across the annual cycle of abundance of hooded warblers where they are. And you can see the Yucatan Peninsula is clearly the center of their wintering distribution. But yeah, let me pause it right here. In fact, I think we can even go directly to April 19th. Yes, there we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thank you. So there we go. Thanks for, yep. No, keep doing that because here's where the hooded warblers are right now. They're already widespread and probably beginning nesting in the southeastern U.S. Typically, they don't get to northwest Pennsylvania until around the 1st of May. And they'll be with us until September when they start their migration south. And we like to think of hooded warblers as our birds, you know, they're Pennsylvania birds, but in fact, we only see them for 4.5 or 5 months every year. But in those 4 or 5 months that they're here, May through September, a whole lot happens. That's where all nesting and offspring care happens. Hooded warblers also do a complete molt of every feather in their plumage is replaced on the breeding grounds here, and then they make their preparations for fall migration. So even though it's just 5 months here, a lot happens in that 5 months. Okay, I've been working at Hemlock Hill on hooded warblers since 2010, and every year we make a big effort to capture and color band adults. We've captured and color banded 680 hooded warblers in the 14 years, and they get these great names like this one, white blue dash yellow silver, to refer to the color band combination that they have. We also spend a lot of time searching for nests, which is one of the funnest things to do. Looking for hooded warbler nests is great fun, which is good because we found a lot of them, and over 1,600 nests in the 14 years. And we also color band nestlings. Over 1,000 of them have been banded over the years as well. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this work and really enjoy about color banding birds is you get to know birds as individuals. I can't resist giving you the history of a couple of my favorite birds. This is female white silver dash blue white right here. I banded her on June 18th in 2011, and this is video that I shot the next day at her nest, just a day after I had banded her. Little did I know at the time that she would be present at Hemlock Hill not only in 2011, but 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. 8 consecutive years. During that time, she had 6 different mates. She built 17 nests, laid 43 eggs, fledged 16 offspring, and somehow she survived 9 round-trip migrations to her Caribbean wintering grounds, which is probably in the vicinity of eastern Nicaragua, based on work that Bridget has done with geolocators. That's pretty much an even 2,000 miles from Hemlock Hill, which means that she racked up 36,000 flight miles over the course of her history. And somehow every year for those 8 years managed to return to Hemlock Hill and nest in the same area of about half a square kilometer. So birds are just amazing little packages of DNA programming to pull off this feat. All of her 6 different mates have all died, but one is still alive, Yellow Blue Blue Silver, her mate from 2015. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Here's a video I took at his nest just this last July. I banded him on June 2nd as an after second year bird, so it means he hatched 2013 or earlier. He's been present at Hemlock Hill ever since. And in 2023, he was at least 10 years old. That's the oldest hooded warbler on record. One interesting thing about it, and you may have noticed it in the video, is that when he returned to Hemlock Hill in May 2019, he had lost the ability to grip with his right foot. He still has his toes, but he can't really grip with it. But he's been fine with that. During the 5 years since his injury, he's successfully raised 16 hooded warbler nestlings, a brown-headed cowbird chick, and the female in this video, she's also banded. She's silver black black orange. She's been Yellow Blue Blue Silver's mate for each of the last 4 years, and that's a pretty remarkable record of mate fidelity for a bird where annual survival is only about 60%. And so to get a male and a female to both survive 4 years and return and remate with each other is pretty remarkable. But this is the part of the study that I just enjoy the most, just getting to know these individual birds and their individual histories. A little bit about the nesting season of hooded warblers. They have this really extended nesting season from mid-May through mid-August. And if initial nesting attempts fail, females will re-nest up to 5 times. They're frequently double brooded, which means even if their first nest is successful, they'll attempt, in many cases, to raise a second brood. Their nests are very conveniently located close to the ground. Knee-high is pretty much the sweet spot for hooded warbler nest site. Incubation period, and the clutch size, 2 to 5 eggs, usually 3 to 4. Most nests have 3 to 4 eggs. The incubation period is 12 days. Females alone do the nest building and the incubation. But once the eggs hatch, both sexes feed the young, and the young fledge usually after 8 or 9 days. So it's a very short nestling period. But that's not the end of parental care. Fledglings don't reach independence until they're about 35 or 40 days old. So they're still being fed by adults until they're reach that age. Okay. One thing about hooded warblers, and this becomes important in the cowbird story later, is they have this really extended nesting season with 2 peaks of nest initiation. What this slide shows is the number of nests initiated on the y-axis and the date of nest initiation through May, June, July, and August. And what you see, there's 2 peaks of nest initiation. One in late May, in early June. That's sort of the first burst of nesting after birds arrived. Males arrive at Hemlock Hill the first week of May, females about a week later, and they start building nest, and the first eggs usually go in the end of May or at the beginning of June. But then there's a second peak of nesting, a smaller peak, but in a somewhat broader peak, and this is usually these second brood attempts that occurs in late June and early July. But the thing that's remarkable about hooded warblers is they keep on nesting as long as it's not a really dry summer like we had last summer. Last summer, there was hardly any July nesting, but in most rainy summers, they'll keep on nesting, initiating nests all through July. The latest nest I've ever had, first egg date was July 31st. Those young fledged on August 23rd, and the female was still feeding nestlings in mid-September, or fledglings in mid-September. So they've got can have this really long breeding season with these 2 peaks of nest initiation. Okay, I Probably all of you are familiar with the numerous conservation challenges that are faced by North American birds. This is a graphic from produced by Cornell University Lab of Ornithology to go along with the this paper. About nearly 3 billion birds have basically disappeared from North America. Population declines that have occurred since 1970. In the North American avifauna. And although the steepest declines are in species like aerial insectivores and also grassland birds, eastern deciduous forest birds have also declined since 1970. It's estimated we have about 170 million fewer birds in the eastern forest than we did back in the 1970s. And one of the persistent concerns about what might be causing or at least be a contributing factor of this decline in eastern forest birds is nest parasitism by brown-headed cowbirds. Has this nest parasitism by cowbirds contributed to the decline of eastern forest birds? Because there's good reason to think that might potentially be a problem, because brown-headed cowbirds historically were a bird of the Great Plains, and only with European settlement and expansion of agriculture have brown-headed cowbirds expanded eastward. This is a classic figure from a paper written 41 years ago now by Margaret Brittingham and Stan Temple. Some of you might know Margaret Brittingham. She's recently retired from Penn State University on the faculty there. But what this graph shows, the a percentage of Christmas bird counts in the southeastern U.S. reporting brown-headed cowbirds from 1900 up through 1980. And you can see cowbirds were fairly uncommonly seen in the southeast in the early part of the 20th century, but they became ubiquitous toward the end of the century. And so as cowbirds have expanded eastward, now cowbirds are parasitizing species that have never experienced cowbirds or seldom experienced cowbird parasitism previously. And hooded warblers are probably one of those species that are relatively recent new host for cowbirds. About 30% of hooded warbler nests at Hemlock Hill are parasitized by cowbirds. Here's a nest with you can see 3 hooded warbler eggs here, but this larger, darker, and more heavily spotted egg is the egg of a brown-headed cowbird. And what happens, cowbird eggs, those eggs, the nestlings hatch sooner. Incubation period for hooded warbler is 12 days. Cowbirds usually hatch at day 11. They've got this 1-day head start. They beg louder, they receive more food, they grow faster. Here's a nest with 2 hooded warbler nestlings, and this is a cowbird chick that's about twice the size of it already. And they receive more food, they grow faster, they potentially outcompete the host young as nestlings and fledglings. And here's a photograph taken by Jürgen Lorentzen, who of a female hooded warbler feeding a fledgling cowbird that weighs 3 times what the adult hooded warbler does. And I want to acknowledge my study collaborator and co-author on this project, Claire Lignac from the Allegheny College class of 2022. Here's Claire flexing in the field to showing her her prowess as a field biologist. But we worked together on this project a few years ago. And what we wanted to do in this work was look at the impact of brown-headed cowbird nest parasitism on 5 different components of hooded warbler nesting success. And these were all things that had been suggested or found in other studies of cowbird parasitism in the literature. We want to see what's the effect of cowbird parasitism on nest abandonment by hooded warblers. How does cowbird parasitism affect the number of hooded warbler eggs in the complete clutch? How does it affect the rates of egg loss and hatching failure in a nest? How it affects the incidence of nest predation during the nestling stage? And how does it affect rates of nestling loss in nests that actually survive from hatching to fledging? So we wanted to look at those aspects of nest success, But we also wanted to determine the impact of cowbirds kind of on the population level. What impact are cowbirds having on the hooded warbler population, both at Hemlock Hill in Pennsylvania and regionally? Okay, and so let's look at those. Let's start with nest abandonment. Okay, here what we're looking at is a graph. We're looking at the probability of nest abandonment in relation to the number of cowbird eggs in the nest. Okay, if there are no cowbird eggs in the nest, it's unparasitized, very low rate of nest abandonment by hooded warblers, down around 4.5% or so. But if that nest is parasitized, boy, things change. There's about 3 times higher risk of nest abandonment if a nest contains 1 or 2 cowbird eggs. And that's probably driven, most of that is driven, I think, by cowbirds jumping the gun and laying an egg before a hooded warbler has laid its first egg. When that happens, not always, but most of the time, the female hooded warbler will abandon the nest and will start to build a new nest right away. So here's the first negative impact of cowbirds on a hooded warbler nest success. If the nest is parasitized, about a 3-time higher probability of that nest being abandoned than if it was unparasitized. Okay. Here's another impact of cowbirds. Here we're looking at, again, the number of cowbird eggs in the complete clutch versus the number of hooded warbler eggs in the complete clutch. If the nest is unparasitized, if there's no cowbird eggs, average clutch size is about 3.2 eggs. But if there's 1 cowbird egg, average number of hooded warbler eggs drops to 2.6. If there's 2 cowbird eggs, it drops down to 2. What could be going on here? Anyone care to hazard a conjecture about why the number of hooded warbler eggs in the nest decreases as the number of cowbird eggs goes up?
Nest space, but females, okay.
That's one good possibility. The nest one is that the appearance of cowbird eggs may cause female hooded warblers to lay fewer eggs. And there's some good evidence that that happens in other species of birds. But in most songbirds, what is, and we don't have direct evidence of this in hooded warblers, but there's plenty of evidence in other species, is that frequently, not always, but frequently female cowbirds remove a host egg before they lay their own first egg. And this is thought to be an adaptation to reduce the risk of nest desertion that we just talked about, is that if extra eggs appear, that might cause females to abandon. But so what may be what is likely going on here is that female cowbirds are actually removing host eggs before they lay their own eggs. And so that's a second impact of cowbirds. It reduces the number of host eggs in the final clutch by either direct removal or stimulating the female hooded warbler to lay fewer eggs. Okay, but there's more impacts. Here's a couple of graphs. Now we're just looking at nests that actually survive to hatching. This top graph shows the number of hooded warbler eggs that just inexplicably disappear prior to hatching. Okay. But in nests that actually survived all the way to hatching. Now, in an unparasitized nest where there are no cowbird eggs, that almost never happens. Mysterious disappearances of single eggs almost never happens in unparasitized nests. In parasitized nest, it happens about 5 times more often, though. Okay, so hooded warbler eggs are disappearing for unexplained reasons from nests that are parasitized. And the other thing that's going on here, the proportion of eggs that remain that actually hatch successfully. This is a term that's called hatchability in the ornithological literature. What's the probability of an egg actually hatching? In unparasitized nest, and this is a pretty typical number, it's about a 90% hatching rate, 90% hatchability. If the nest isn't destroyed by predators and the nest survives all the way to hatching, that egg has about a 90% chance of hatching. But in parasitized nests where there are 1 or 2 cowbird eggs, you can see hatchability goes way down. Okay, what could be causing these 2 problems? Well, there's a bunch of things that are going on here. One possibility is that, well, maybe female cowbirds continue to remove some host eggs even after a laying has actually happened. That's one possibility. But the most likely cause of this loss of eggs and also the reduced hatchability is that when female cowbirds lay eggs, they have a very high probability of damaging any host eggs that are actually already present. And the reason for that is pretty darn remarkable, and I'll show you a video of it in just a minute. When female cowbirds lay eggs and nest, they do not sit down politely at the bottom of the nest and just lay the eggs. They drop their eggs from a height of several centimeters, like dive bombing the eggs in the host nest. Cowbird eggs are really strong. They are much stronger. They have much thicker shells. They're very resistant to breakage. And essentially, female cowbirds, this is another adaptation that they have for brood parasitism. In addition to removing host eggs to reduce potential competition with their nestlings, they have this adaptation where they use their eggs as missiles that actually damage host eggs. And I don't have a good video of this from brown-headed cowbirds, but there's this great video that was produced for shiny cowbirds. This is basically the equivalent of the brown-headed cowbird in South America. And one of its host species, the rufous collared sparrows, which are pretty much the equivalent, the tropical equivalent of white-throated sparrows, the same genus anyway. But this is a great video produced by biologists from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, Analia Lopez. And this is great stuff. Any way to lay an egg? Amazing. And so what may be going on is one factor that is probably going on here, explaining these losses, is that a lot of hooded warbler eggs in parasitized nest are damaged. And hooded warblers, they're incapable of grabbing an entire egg and taking it out. Their bills are just not big enough for that. But if the egg is cracked or has a puncture in it of something like that, and the egg is leaking and clearly damaged, then the hooded warblers can probably grab it and remove it themselves. So that's one of the things that's going on. And then the explanation for why hatchability is lower in these parasitized nests is that egg bombing by the female cowbirds may well have damaged the eggs and reduced its ability to hatch. Okay, and then finally, a third thing that might be going on is that because cowbird eggs are a little larger than hooded warbler eggs, that larger egg size may actually cause poor incubation contact with the host egg. And so the hooded warbler eggs aren't getting warmed as effectively as they would have been if the nest was unparasitized. And so the idea here is this larger cowbird egg makes it harder for the female hooded warbler to make really good contact with her brood patch with all the eggs. And so some of the eggs, so the eggs are less likely to hatch successfully as a result of that. So it's probably some combination of these things, three things that are going on that explains this increased rates of egg loss and hatching fail. So you can see we haven't even gotten to hatching yet, and we've already got some pretty serious impacts of cowbirds on hooded warbler nesting success. Let's look at these last two ones now, the incidence of nest predation during the nestling stage and rates of nestling loss in nests that survive from hatching to fledging. Okay, and what we're looking at here is it's basically a survival curve looking at the proportion of nests surviving and in other words, nests that weren't destroyed by a predator in nests where there was no cowbird nestling present versus nests where there was a cowbird nestling present. What you can see, if there's no cowbird present, typical hooded warbler nest has about, if it makes it to hatching, it's got about a 75% chance of avoiding predators and being able to fledge successfully, which again usually happens about 8 or 9 at day 8 or 9. Okay, but what happens if there's a cowbird present? If there's a cowbird chick present in the nest, look what happens. Instead of a 75% chance of avoiding predation, drops down to about 55%. I saw somebody with an what are you thinking there is
Seemed to say earlier that the nestling makes it louder.
those cowbird nestlings are loud and obnoxious, and I don't have a video of this, but here's a video of a cowbird fledgling, which is also loud and obnoxious. This is a cowbird fledgling begging from a song sparrow host, and the nestling cowbirds, particularly when they're older, really are noisy. And it's a combination of the noise, and also they are so much larger, they make so much demand, it means there's just a lot more feeding activity at the nest. And so the combination of the noise and all the extra parental care that's happening, that probably explains why nests that have a cowbird chick in them are much less likely to, they're much more likely to be destroyed by a predator than a nest that has more well-behaved hooded warbler nestlings. Okay.
So here we have birds that have this incredible migration fidelity. Why is it they don't realize that that's not their chick?
That's the $1 billion question for those of you who on Zoom. The question is, these hooded warblers are incredible about migration and so many things. Why don't they recognize that this cowbird chick is not theirs? And that is really the $1 million question, because it does seem like a puzzle. One part of the explanation, again, is that hooded warblers really have, until 100 years ago, they had very limited experience with any brood parasites, at least in terms of evolutionary experience. Some birds are really good at recognizing and rejecting parasitized nests. For example, jays are really good at recognizing cowbird eggs and just ejecting them. But jays are big enough. Jays are really big, smart. They've also got the bills that they can grab the eggs and eject them. But hooded warblers and most of the cowbird host are just do not have either the physical ability or the brain capacity to recognize that, hey, something's wrong here. This is not my offspring. Chris.
Yeah, I think it's like yellow warblers, they sometimes like build nests on top of the nest.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, Chris Lundberg's question was yellow warblers, one of their anti-parasite strategies is to actually build nest over the top. If a cowbird egg goes in, they'll just keep adding more nest material and then start over. Nope, I've never seen that in hooded warblers. But yellow warblers, because they also breed out west where cowbirds have had a longer history, yellow warblers have had a longer coevolutionary history with cowbirds, so there has been more opportunity for this coevolution between them. No, but those are really the big questions, is, you know, why it's so obvious to us, but it's not to these host species like the song sparrow and the hooded warblers. And then finally, the last aspect of cowbird parasitism is what impact does a cowbird nestling have on its hooded warbler nestmates? And that's not good either. If there's no cowbird chick present and the nest isn't destroyed by predators, a typical hooded warbler chick has about a 95% chance of surviving to fledging, as long as the nest isn't destroyed by a predator. But if there's a cowbird chick there that's getting all that extra food, that the percentage of hooded warblers that actually fledge successfully goes down quite a bit. And so you can see that, boy, this all kind of adds up. And this graph shows the overall impact of cowbird parasitism on hooded warbler nest success at each stage of the nesting cycle. For example, let's start with the clutch. Oh, yep. Once even before the clutch is complete, there's already a hit on hooded warblers, right? There's fewer hooded warbler eggs in that complete clutch. those nests are more likely to be abandoned, which means that kind of reduces the overall success or nest surviving to hatching. Then you have to figure in egg hatching success, nest survival from hatching to fledgling. At every step, there's an impact of cowbirds on nesting success. And so the end result is, on average, Claire and I calculated that non-parasitized nest, an average hooded warbler nest will produce 1.3 young, basically. But an average nest that's parasitized is only going to produce about 0.41. So that means that's a 68% reduction in hooded warbler nest success by cowbirds, which seems like a lot. I think you'll agree. But then the question is, how do those per nest impacts scale up to affect regional population trends? And so this is the other thing Claire deserves a lot of credit for really pushing me to think about this and try to include the population aspects in this study. And so what we want to know is, given the high rates of cowbird parasitism and the pretty severe impact it has on nest success, how are hooded warbler populations doing in Pennsylvania? Well, whenever I have a question like this, if I want to know how a particular species is doing, a breeding bird in Pennsylvania is doing, where I go is this book, the Second Atlas of Breeding Birds in Pennsylvania. For those of you not familiar, it is a phenomenal data-rich compilation of just amazing amounts of data, all contributed by us, birders who contributed to this atlas. And as Brian mentioned, the third Pennsylvania Atlas is now just gearing up. And if you have not done atlasing previously, I highly recommend it. To me, it's the most fun you can have birding, because in addition to seeing a species, you then get to know a lot more about it, because you're trying to say, okay, where could it be? Is this nesting? Can I get some evidence of nesting? Is it feeding fledglings? You just learn so much more about the birds when you're really conscientiously atlasing and trying to get some evidence that they're actually breeding in a location. Okay, but here's data from the first Pennsylvania Breeding Bird Atlas. And this data, did anybody participate in the first? Yes. Unfortunately, I did not participate. I did not start at Allegheny until 1990, so I missed the first atlas. But for those of you unfamiliar with the atlas, the shadings here, lighter pink means possible hooded warbler breeding, a little darker means probable, and the very dark means confirmed. Usually that's the observation of nests or fledglings themselves. And in the first atlas, hooded warblers were found in about 1,400 of the 5,000 or so atlas blocks that there are in the States. Okay, what's our expectation for the second atlas? Oh yeah, cowbird parasitism is bad. Populations of songbirds are declining. Can't be good, right? What happened in the second atlas? It increased 71%, or at least hooded warblers were recorded in 71% more atlas blocks in the second atlas compared to the first ones. And I did contribute a few of these observations here for this atlas, and I'm sure a lot of you did as well. That's impressive. How about some other sources of information about how hooded warblers are doing regionally? Some of you familiar with the North American Breeding Bird Survey? Chris has anybody ever done a North American breeding? Chris has done one. Yeah, where have you done one? Okay. 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 That's great. Yeah, Chris Lundberg is used to do one and is currently doing one well. But for those of you unfamiliar with the survey, it's basically a car route or a bike route, I guess you could do it. It's where you have regular, it's too long. How many stops? Is it 50 stops? 50 stops where you do a point count. And this survey was started way back in 1966. And it's a phenomenal, again, a community science project, just like the Pennsylvania Breeding Bird Atlas. And let's look at some data from the breeding bird survey, because again, these routes have been done since 1966 is when they got started. Let's look at how hooded warbler is doing in Pennsylvania. So this is Pennsylvania breeding bird survey data. There's no actual numbers here, it's just a relative abundance, but boy, hooded warblers have been doing very well. And that not just in Pennsylvania, they've been doing really well in Ohio and really well in New York too. Okay, and if you look at all the data from, and this is data across the entire range, this is a map for data from 1966 to 2015. Blue basically means really good. Species is expanding, and you can see hooded warblers are doing really well in most of their range. In the extreme south and in some other regions where it's red, they're doing less poorly. So a lot of this probably has to do with climate change, as the species is moving, its range is moving north. But in Partners in Flight in 2016, they estimated the global breeding population of hooded warblers is now about 5 million, and it's doubled since 1970. So hooded warblers, at least in our region, are doing really well, even with these pretty severe impacts of cowbirds on nesting success. So what is their secret? How have hooded warblers thrive despite these pretty severe effects of cowbird nest parasitism on the success of individual nests? Well, one thing is that hooded warblers, if they abandon a nest or a nest is destroyed by predators that's parasitized, hooded warblers do not waste any time. Those females start to build a new nest literally within minutes after a nest fails. And usually, and this is almost like clockwork, you can count, I call it the 6-day rule. It takes a female hooded warbler 6 days to go from failure of one nest to laying the first egg of the nest attempt. Okay, and some females, if they're unlucky, they may have to make as many as 5 attempts if nests keep failing because of nest predators. So they can make lots of different attempts over the course of the season. So that's one clue why hooded warblers are doing fairly well. The second reason, and I think this is probably the most important one, is that while hooded warblers have this really prolonged nesting season, brown-headed cowbirds do not. Brown-headed cowbirds, they peak in late April and early May, and their breeding season tails off over the course of the summer. This is that same slide you saw earlier that showed those 2 peaks of hooded warbler nesting, one in May and one late May and early June, and the other in late June and early July. But let's add a second y-axis to this plot. What's the probability of a nest along this time scale actually being parasitized by a brown-headed cowbird? And here's what that looks like. Really precipitous decline. Those first nests, and this is very discouraging when you go out in May, parasitism rates are 40, 50, sometimes 60% for those early nests that are laid in middle and late May. But you can see by the time the second peak of nesting happens, the probability of nest parasitism has dropped to about 10%. And any nest initiated in mid-July, there's almost no chance of them being parasitized. The cowbirds have basically quit by then. Okay, so I think this is the other reason why, this is probably the most important reason why hooded warblers are probably doing well. They've got this really extended breeding season. They basically outlast the brown-headed cowbirds. And as a result, they are producing a lot of nests in at times where the probability of cowbird parasitism is really low. Okay, and then finally, the third thing that's probably going on is that regular double brooding. As that females with that successful early nest, they'll often attempt to raise a second brood, and those second broods are initiated, again, late June, early July, when the probability of cowbird parasitism is pretty darn low at that stage, as opposed to the 40 or 50% in May. It's usually down to around 10% or even less for those second brood attempts. Okay, so some good news about a migratory bird. That's really nice that hooded warblers are doing well and they're dealing with cowbird parasitism. Does this make anybody like cowbirds anymore? Yeah, it's without permits, you're not supposed to do that. I have had permits to do this because wanted to make sure that, we're doing a bunch of different experiments for that. But yes, and but what I realized is that removing the cowbird eggs, a lot of the damage has already happened by the time that, those early events that we talked about, cowbirds removing host eggs, damage to the host eggs, all that's already happened. And so the cowbird has already had a pretty significant effect even right there. Certainly removing the cowbird eggs does improve the nesting success, but it's already taken a pretty significant hit at that point.
Good attribute. It's urgent.
Do cowbirds have any good attributes? That's a hard one for me. Not really. They tend to, I think they're considered kind of a nuisance even in agricultural settings for the most part, particularly in winter feedlots and that sort of thing. They're seed eaters, yeah, and they eat a fair number of insects in the breeding season, but primarily seed eaters in winter. We did this analysis, okay, cowbirds aren't doing so bad. I still don't like cowbirds, One of the funnest things for me to do is, look for hooded warbler nests. And it's just this great sense of joy and excitement when you find a hooded warbler nest. And then you go up and look in, you say, darn, it's got a cowbird egg in it. You just know, well, this nest is on average, it's only going to be about a third as successful as if there had been no cowbird eggs in it. But what I've tried to do since we've done this analysis, I still don't like cowbirds, but I respect them because, I may have spent 2 hours looking for this hooded warbler nest. And then when I get up there, I find out, oh yeah, I'm not the first one to have found it. This brown-headed cowbird that does not have a PhD, my 14 years of experience and a brain the size of a pea has already found this nest. And so I still don't like cowbirds, but they have earned my respect. Just the remarkable adaptation. Females are just so good at finding the nest of other species. It's really remarkable. In fact, my favorite, I found a hooded warbler nest once because of a cowbird. I've sitting there and said, hey, there's a female cowbird. Oh, she just went to it. Now it's a hooded warbler nest, and so she found it before I did. So I've tried to develop that respect for cowbirds, but I confess I still don't like them. I did when I've let that permit lapse now, but I was doing it as some various kinds of experiments we were doing just to measure the impact of cowbirds, but there is some, usually not, because the cowbirds have to get that timing just right. Occasionally you'll find a cowbird egg that's laid after incubation has started, but cowbirds, in order for them to get the advantage they need to get an egg in early so that it's already present when the female starts incubating, so that it'll hatch a day early, and their cowbird nestlings will have an advantage over the.
I'm not sure that I saw any graphs to show the health of the cowbirds from Atlas 1 to Atlas 2.
They're actually declining a little bit. Yes, I did not show that. Not tremendously, but cowbird numbers have diminished somewhat. A lot of this probably due is, Pennsylvania continues to be reforested. That's probably contributing to why hooded warblers are doing so well, but that may also be contributing to the reductions of cowbirds. So cowbirds have declined a little bit, not precipitously.
Questions about banding. When you band nestlings, you also use the unique band combinations?
I did for a few years. When the question is, do we put the unique color band combinations on nestlings? Early on in the study, where I was interested in questions about development of foraging behavior of fledglings and that sort of thing. I did, so I'd be able to recognize each fledgling individually. When I wrapped that work up, I started then just putting one color band, just basically a brood identifier on on nestlings. And then this last, and one of the frustrating things about banning nestlings is return rate. It's called natal philopatry, return to their breeding grounds, is really, really low. And ironically, in 2022, I said, I'm just not going to bother ban nestlings this year because so few of them actually return. Some of you may know Steve Latta. He's with the National Aviary. He's been doing this banding project in conjunction with the Foundation for Sustainable Forestry that's based in Northwest Pennsylvania. But Steve was at field site exactly 50 kilometers from Hemlock Hill, and he caught a banded hooded warbler, and it was a bird that I had banded as a nestling. And so this is a 50-kilometer natal dispersal distance. And I told him, it's kind of ironic that you got this the year I decided, it's not worth banding nestlings anymore. So I'm thinking I might try to ban nestlings again this fall, but it's pretty low yield. I can count on two hands the number of nestlings I banded that have returned and bred at Hemlock Hill. I mean, yes, like the cowbirds are really hard to study because they're very cryptic, and so no, I haven't thought about doing it. Lots of people have done it, usually by putting radio transmitters on cowbirds to look at. And females do have distinct home ranges, and they concentrate in particular areas. But no, I haven't really thought about that because I don't like cowbirds, even though they are pretty amazing. So.
And it sounds like most of the studies that you've done involved with the nests, the eggs, and the nestlings, not necessarily the fledglings after they leave the nest, because you would have to have bands on them in order to.
Yeah, well, I did do a lot of just looking at the development of their foraging behavior and that sort of thing. But you're right, it's once they become independent, which happens around day 35 or 40, they go somewhere. I wish I knew where, but they leave, they're no longer around, and you just won't see them again for the most part. That's why it's kind of low yield.
I was thinking about the second broods or the third broods and about the energy that it takes to lay those eggs. And so the health of the female hooded warblers, has there been any tracking of at the longevity of hooded warblers that do these multiple broods, or even like the eggs that are hatched in those subsequent?
Yeah, I mean, that's one question that I'm kind of interested. This is another, Brian's question is, what are the energetic consequences for females who, just lay all these eggs and breed all through the season, and then they have to molt, and then they have to migrate 2,000 miles, that's got to be tough. And one of the retirement projects that I want to do is try to look at that question to see if there are survival consequences of both cowbird parasitism or really intensive reproductive efforts. Another thing that this would be a topic for another talk sometime. One interesting thing that hooded warblers do is that they have this very intense molt. This was something that Bridget tipped me off on early on when I was working on them, is that hooded warblers will drop all 12 of their tail feathers simultaneously at the same time when they're replacing multiple flight feathers in the wing. And it's not just hooded warblers that do this. I did this with a project with Bob Mulvihill. Some of you might know Bob from the National Aviary. Bob had this massive data set on warbler molt at Powder Mill Avian Research Center. Turns out all the warblers have this really intense molt where no tail feathers, they're missing all kinds of flight feathers in their wing. They can barely fly at this stage. And for about 2 weeks, they just what hooded warblers do. You may say, I've never seen a hooded warbler like that. And I'll tell you, oh, I know why you've never seen it. They are hiding. And it takes a lot of work to find them in these situations. But one of the things that happens when males go into that really intense molt, and males molt about 2 weeks earlier than females, if there's still parental care going on, usually what happens, the male deserts the offspring and lets the female take it from there. And so that's another thing that's related to your question, because now this female, she's been deserted. She compensates for the male. She basically doubles her provisioning effort. And so she takes over for the male. But one of the things I'm interested in, and this is a retirement project, is those females that are deserted, are they less likely to return the next year? Because they're clearly having to work really hard to compensate for that male desertion. Yeah, so there's all kinds of interesting things that warblers do in late summer that most of us are completely unfamiliar with because they're really they are very shy and skulky. And who likes to go birding in mid-August anyway? You know, it's not the greatest time.
Some of the warbler species, are there other warblers that do multiple broods, nestlings?
Yeah,
They're only the
it's interesting. The question is double brooding, how widespread that is in warblers. It's kind of spotty. There are lots of species that are double brooded, like common yellowthroat is double brooded, but American redstart is one and done. You know, some other species, yellow warbler is one and done. Also, they'll just produce one brood. If their first nest is destroyed by a predator, they'll try again, but they almost never attempt a second brood if their first one is successful. And so like yellow warblers, American redstarts, they breed and they molt and they get out of here really quickly. Hooded warblers, one of the interesting things, and this is another thing I'm interested in hooded warblers, is some males will just linger on their territories into early October. You know, they've been done with molt. You'd think that they ought to hustle down to the Yucatan Peninsula, Nicaragua, wherever they're going, so they can get a good winter territory. They establish territories in the winter, but a lot of these males will just hang out on their breeding territory into early October. They'll occasionally be singing. Some of you may have been out and you'll hear a hooded warbler singing in late September or early October, and you'll wonder, what the heck is he doing? You know what I wonder? I wonder, what the heck is he doing? But that's another retirement project that I want to look at. But so it's a kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot of these warblers are single brooded, but others, hooded warblers, Kentucky warbler, common yellowthroat, black-throated greens is another double brooded one. It's a lot less known about this because they're breeding way up in the trees, but they're quite common at Hemlock Hill, and you'll see females feeding fledglings into August sometimes, and so it's a real mix of this, and why some species are single while others are doubled is an unanswered question. Miriam.
If a hooded warbler fledge alongside a cowbird fledgling, now any studies have all been done on, you know, their survival to adulthood or, you know, breeding success in the 12 years or anything. So.
Great question. Miriam's question is, what's the impact? Yeah, what's the impact of a cowbird nestling on hooded warblers nestlings after they leave the nest? And that's a great question. That has been investigated in some other species, but not in hooded warblers. In hooded warblers, again, you might be able to follow it up to about age 40, but then after that, unless you had radio transmitters on them, you wouldn't be able to find them after that. So there's certainly some concern that, and we have some evidence of this, that if there's a cowbird chick in the nest, those hooded warbler nestlings are going to grow a lot more slowly, and so that may cause some problems for them post fledging. But that's enough. I need a few more lifetimes to try to address all these great questions that you've come up to, and unfortunately, I'm not going to have that. I'm pretty sure.
Can you say something about other nests you encounter in your studies?
Oh, can I say something about other nests I encounter in the studies? Yes, lots of wood thrush nest out there. Bridget has had students, and Bridget has done lots of work on wood thrushes. Veeries nest commonly on the property. I've said black-throated green warblers are common, but boy, I've never seen a nest. Occasionally you'll see chestnut-sided warblers. Black-throated blue warblers have been increasing at the property in recent years, and their nests are dead ringers for hooded warbler nests. And more than a few times I've said, hey, I finally found this hooded warbler nest. And then I'll come back the next day and say, why is a black-throated blue female sitting on this hooded warbler nest? And then it dawns on me that I did not find a hooded warbler nest.
For parasitism on the other species too?
Yes, cowbirds are quite uh, indiscriminate in who they parasitize. Blue-headed vireos, red-eyed vireos, those are both common hosts that you see. You see lots of cowbird fledglings being fed by those two species. One thing I'm interested in is, and this is another retirement project. I didn't have much luck finding black-throated blue warbler nests. One thing about hooded warblers that many of you who are familiar with them, females are really noisy. They produce these chip calls all the time, and that's the best way to find nests. That makes it fairly easy to find hooded warbler nests. But I think it also makes it really easy for cowbirds to find hooded warbler nests for the same reason. What I've noticed, I don't think I've seen a black-throated blue warbler nest at Hemlock Hill, and admittedly, it's a small sample size right now. I don't think I've ever seen a parasitized black-throated blue because black-throated blues are pretty quiet. The females, they make these really, some of you probably heard it, they're like Junco-like chip notes, but they're very quiet and they're not very demonstrative. And so one idea that I have is to try to compare parasitism rates of black-throated blues and hooded warblers. I hope to get started on that last year, but for some reason last year I just had terrible luck finding black-throated blue warbler nests because they're a lot harder to find than hooded warblers.
If you recordings of the different birds, fake them, fake nets, just to see how many covers.
Yeah, that's in fact one of the ideas that I had is what if you found a black-throated blue nest, black-throated blue warbler nest under construction, and then you set up a tape recorder to broadcast hooded warbler vocalizations from that nest. Will that actually increase its probability? Yeah, it's kind of a mean thing to do, but that is another thing that I'm kind of interested in, is that hooded warblers seem to be particularly good targets compared to some of the other warblers. But red-eyed vireos, blue-headed vireos, I think wood thrushes occasionally get parasitized by cowbirds. Yeah, cowbirds are out there in big numbers.
Back when you were studying, did you have a lot of difficulty with studying?
They were parasitized a fair amount. The main difficulty of Canada warblers is they studying them in these. I'd spent a couple years working with Canada warblers before I decided they're really hard. But I was working in them in these wet bogs with lots of these fern hummocks. And early on, it wasn't too hard to find nests. But then once the ferns grew up, you just could not see anything in these fern bogs, and the nests were down there underneath all that on the ground, and it was just really hard to figure out what was happening.
Do you use any technology when you're searching, or you just have to find them by?
That's one of the things I like about this. It's very low tech. There's a lot of interesting high tech stuff that is being done in bird research now. For example, these various kinds of telemetry tags that you can put on. Bridget's done some great work with these tags. They're called geolocators. Basically, they're just these little tags you can attach to birds that have a clock and a light sensor, but that can give you information about where this bird spent the winter, because it tells you what time it got light and what time it gets dark. The trick on those is you have to attach it to a bird, and then the bird has to return, and you have to be able to catch it and remove that tag to get it. For larger birds, boy, there's amazing technology that's available. You can get these solar panel GPS transmitters that broadcast. For example, you can take an albatross and attach one of these packages to it, and then you can just go back into home and drink gin and tonics while the data come rolling in as to where this bird is. That kind of technology is. Hooded warblers are 11-gram birds, and even putting a geolocator on it is a little bit dicey, but we're hoping that at some point there'll be cheap, really small tags that will be able to tell us lots of cool stuff that about where these birds winter and where they migrate.
ever wonder what the female cowbirds do after they lay their eggs? Do you ever see any evidence that they hang around to see what happens to their eggs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of people have looked at that. There's one famous study of prothonotary warblers in Illinois that found found evidence for what's called the mafia hypothesis for female brown-headed cowbirds. Is that in this population, it turns out no one else has been able to replicate this. In fact, one of the permits that I had for removing cowbird eggs was for investigating this. But in this Illinois population, what happens if a cowbird egg is removed, the female cowbird will return and destroy the entire nest. And so basically the cowbirds in this Illinois population are farming prothonotary warblers, basically. They're, and it's called the mafia hypothesis, because if the female cowbirds are enforcers, that if you reject if you abandon the nest, or rather if you eject the cowbird eggs, and this is done experimentally by the researchers, if they remove the cowbird egg, the cowbirds will actually destroy the nest. Lots of people have looked for that or other populations, and we did at Hemlock Hill for a while, and we just have never found any good evidence of that. So it's just it's one of these things that was a pretty cool story in this one population, but it's questionable whether it occurs anywhere else. The experiments we've done at Hemlock Hill, if you remove a cowbird egg, that nest is no more likely to be destroyed by subject to predation than an unparasitized nest. So we haven't found any evidence of that. But there is some possibility that female cowbirds may be doing that kind of monitoring their eggs in other populations. What's that? I don't like cowbirds, but. Yeah, Marion's question, it's really fascinating how they cowbirds grow up to be socially adjusted, because they're raised by these variety of parents with all kinds of diets, but lots of people looked at this. There's obviously no song learning. In most songbirds, males learn song from their parents, and obviously in cowbirds that can't happen, or instead of a cowbird going as and all the other calls that they do, they would sing the songs of their host parents. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable that, again, that's the part of the thing. For respecting cowbirds, you can try to do that. Oh, one thing I forgot to say, I should definitely want to thank Jean and Bridget for allowing me to use Hemlock Hill and for their enthusiastic support all these years. Thank you, Jean and Bridget, and also a whole bunch of different Allegheny College students who have contributed to the research over the years, which has made it a lot of fun. Hopefully those students learned something from me. I know I learned a lot from students. Some things I probably shouldn't have learned, but it was always fun working with students in the field. Any other questions?
Are there any questions online for
Oh, let's see. Are there questions online? I'll be glad to try to take some questions online. I don't think if anybody has
Maybe.
any.
If anyone that's online would like to unmute and ask a question. Maybe not, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if not, thank you all very much. That was a great set of questions. And so, oops, one.
Just comment, you're always welcome to go down the road to our Laura Olson Memorial Sanctuary, do some studies there.
Yeah, Brian mentioned that. I'm actually unfamiliar with where it is.
Rockdale and Forest Home Road.
Rockdale and Forest Home, that is right down the road. So, okay, I will check it out. So, yeah, thank you. Good, but thank you all very much. That was a lot of fun. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, everybody that joined us online and in person here. And I'm going to stop recording now. Here we are, stop recording.